Hey guys, welcome to the channel. This is part 1 of What If Naruto teleported into Final Fantasy X. If you guys enjoy this what if, then comment, like and subscribe. Let's go. Also, the video goal is 10 likes, so let me know that you're interested in the series and you want the next part. Then go ahead and check out the other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Also share the video with your friends and link in the description. So let's go. Yuna, apprentice summoner, daughter of the late High Summoner Braska, smiled softly as she sat on the beach of the island she had come to call her hometown, watching the sun as it slowly rose above the horizon. She woke up early that morning, perhaps earlier than usual. It's not because she was being bothered by anything, but because of the happiness and excitement she was feeling. Last night, during a small party the villagers organized to celebrate the end of her training in the art of summoning, her teacher had announced to Yuna, her guardians and everyone that it's time for the daughter of Lord Braska to head into Besaid Temple's Cloister of Trials to obtain her first Aeon, a mighty and powerful creature granted by the faith, and become a full-fledged summoner. It's the only thing that she had wanted ever since she decided to follow her father's footsteps. Being acknowledged as a summoner meant that Yuna could start her own pilgrimage, a journey a summoner has to undertake in order to defeat sin and bring about the calm, an uncertain amount of time of peace which sin was no more, for the people of Spira. Yuna knew that it was going to be a tough journey, and the calm would never last forever, much like her father's calm that lasted less than a year. She also understood she would have to sacrifice a lot on her journey to obtain the final Aeon, but Yuna knew it'd be totally worth it. With her guardians, her friends, at her side and the supports of the people of Spira, Yuna knew that there was nothing she couldn't overcome. "I will do it, father," Yuna said softly, gently brushing a strand of her soft brown hair behind her ear, hoping that her father at the far plane could hear her. "I will defeat sin." It's not just something she would do, but something she must do. Realizing that the village of Besaid was slowly waking up, Yuna decided that it's time for her to return to her home before any of her friends could get worried. Standing up from her position, Yuna dusted her dress of the slightly wet sand before turning to pick up her black boots. Yuna was about to leave but stopped abruptly when her eyes caught sight of something on the sea. Her eyes became wide when she noticed it was no something, but rather someone, a man with blonde hair. The young apprentice summoner became even more worried when she saw him holding loosely onto a wooden log, unconscious but definitely alive. He was slowly being pushed to the beach, but Yuna had no intention of waiting until that moment, so without thinking, the summoner in training removed her clothes, leaving herself only in her underwear, and jumped into the ocean before any of the villagers could stop her, or know what's going on. As she swam toward him as fast as she could, Yuna cursed herself for not noticing him sooner, but she could berate herself later. Now she had to save him, she's going to use every ounce of her limited physical strength to do it. It took her a couple of minutes to get to him, and she immediately checked his pulse to see if he was still alive like she had hoped him to. A feeling of relief washed through her when she felt his pulse, weak, but still there. However, that feeling didn't last long when she saw the something red coming from his chest. It's blood, his blood. He was bleeding, badly. With the amount of blood she saw, Yuna was afraid that he might be dead even before she could bring him back the island. She knew he had to be healed and taken care of, or else he's not going to last long. Yuna didn't stop to wonder how someone could still be alive after losing enough blood to turn an entire area of blue sea water in red, or what had happened to him to leave him in such state. As soon as she was able to get behind him, Yuna wrapped her arms around his torso and removed him from the wooden log and tried her best to swim backwards while pulling him with her. It's not easy, and Yuna soon found herself struggling with his weight and the currents. Unfortunately, the winds blew quite strong that day. Suddenly, when she was slowly losing strength and starting to feel very tired, she heard a loud call. "Yuna." Hearing that voice, Yuna turned her head around and smiled in relief when she saw Waka, one of her guardians, swimming toward her from afar. Waka was a blitzball player. Water was his domain. It didn't take him more than 20 seconds to get to her. "What are you thinking, ya?" he asked furiously and grabbed onto the man's shirt, keeping both of them from sinking into the water. "You should have called us." I'm sorry," she answered honestly. But I can't." I know," Waka said hurriedly as he swam back to the beach, bringing both of them with him. "I will bring both of you back to the beach, just try to hold him tight, okay?" Nodding her head gratefully while kicking her legs to help Waka, Yuna turned her head and saw many villagers standing at the shore looking at her worriedly. Lulu and Kamari Ronso, her other guardians, were also present, and they looked very worried, maybe even more so than the villagers. Lady Summoner. One of the elders of Besaid village called out worriedly when Yuna crawled onto the beach, breathing heavily in tiredness, "Are you alright?" "Why yes, thank you, elder." Yuna. Lulu immediately rushed forward and kneeled down next to Yuna. Using a cloak she received from the tall Ronso, she quickly covered Yuna's body and asked the girl she viewed as her little sister in frustration, something quite rare for the usually stoic woman, "What are you thinking, you idiot girl? Have you lost your mind? I'm so sorry." Yuna lowered her head while taking a deep breath. "I couldn't leave him out there and run to find help." She turned her head back, looking at her guardian as he pulled the bleeding and unconscious man onto the shore and, as gently as he could, put him down the sand, because it might be too late. She finished her sentence. "But Yuna, don't forget that he's injured. We have to help him, Lulu." Yuna snapped her head back and said to Lulu in a hurry, cutting her off before she could start scolding her for her stupidity. "She's right, the guy is bleeding pretty badly, yeah." Waka spoke up and lifted his black shirt off, looking at the deep cut on his chest. "Dear Yevon, how's he even alive?" he asked in shock, checking his pulse, but it was quite unnecessary because he could see the man breathing very slowly. Lulu looked at the stranger for a moment before nodding her head, helping Yuna stand up to her feet. "Everyone, please bring him to the inn, we will see what we can do there." Kamari stepped forward and helped Waka, holding the man by his legs. Both of them carried the stranger to the inn of the village, with Yuna and Lulu following closely behind them. Line break, cracked skull, broken cheekbone, bruised jaw, many bruises around throat, several deep cut and long gashes on chest, 6 broken ribs, extensive bruising on torso, deep cuts on thighs and a broken shin, broken wrist and ankles. Yuna cringed painfully as she listened to a number of damages the man had suffered as he laid motionless on the single bed in the room they had brought him to, stripped down to his boxers using a scissors to cut his soaked clothes and remove them from his body. His life was hanging by a thread, and she knew that he was seriously in need of help. "I will heal him," the summoner said hurriedly and kneeled down to the floor next to his bed, beside her only female guardian. Tightening her hands around her rod, Yuna was about to cast healing magic on him, only to be stopped by Lulu, who reached her hand out and put it on her staff. She made a sound of surprise and turned her head to look at her guardian. "Yuna, we don't know who he is," Lulu stated sternly. "Look at his injuries. He probably got himself in a fight to be in a state like this. What if he's a bad man or? It doesn't matter. We saved him, didn't we?" Yuna shook her head to Lulu. "He is dying. We can't just leave him like this." "Yuna is right, Lu," Waka said as he crossed his arms on his chest. "We can't just save someone and leave them to die later, yeah." Lulu looked like she wants to argue, but decided to remain silent in the end. Nodding her head at Lulu's silent approval, Yuna raised her staff and cast one of the most basic white spells she learnt from her trainer on him, Cure. She might not be the strongest white magic user, but she had always been the village's best healer, mainly because she wouldn't stop until the patient is fully healed and back to their feet. It helped her earn a lot of affection from the villagers, not just because she was a summoner, the daughter of a high summoner who defeated Sin years ago. Her white spell was working its magic, as the bruising and cuts were slowly starting to heal, hissing as the mixture reached the most irritated parts. It was a satisfying process, and she took a few seconds to watch his bruises fade from his body. After the effect of her magic wore off, some of the smaller bruises and cuts on his body had completely disappeared, but the worse injuries continued to remain despite her best effort. Gripping her magic rod tightly, Yuna cast her spell once again, but she could only make a few larger cuts disappear, and force some of them to close up. Stubbornly, Yuna kept casting her spell rapidly, draining herself from her mana reserve. She was able to stop the bleeding from his more fatal injuries, but there was not much she could do after that. Even the summoner had to admit that she didn't know if she could fully heal him, as she had never dealt with such injuries before. Besaid had always been a peaceful island, and the injuries its inhabitants had got were minor, from wild animals, fiends or simply occupational accidents. It was also the first time she had seen so much blood in someone on the verge of dying, but Yuna managed to keep her calm and concentrate on healing him. That's enough, Yuna. Lulu decided after her summoner's 11th attempt to cast Cure, and one attempt to cast a more advanced version of the white magic, Cura, but failed. You have reached your limit. Any more than that and you will pass out in exhaustion. But, listen Yuna, you won't be able to do anything for him if you pass out. Lulu stated sternly, stopping Yuna from doing more harm than good to herself, and don't worry, we won't leave him like this either. You have stopped bleeding. We can use herbs and potions to speed up his healing process. A soft smile appeared on the woman's face as she said comfortingly, you have done well Yuna. He's going to be alright. Hesitatingly, Yuna nodded her head absently. She wanted to do more, but for now, she decided to trust her guardian's judgment. Line break. The next morning, the young female summoner was out collecting plants and gathering herbs. Once she had satisfyingly, Yuna stood up and picked up her basket, half full of leaves and flowers of all kinds, and continued on her way. She walked silently through the trees, listening to the twitters and sounds of the birds, as she walked, enjoying the tranquil, silent melancholy of nature. She halted when she came across a good spot for collecting supplies that she stumbled upon one day that she often used. With her basket slung over her arm, she began picking the spiky green leaves of aloe that she needed. After a few moments had passed by, she moved on to another batch of plants sprouting at large brown roots at the base of a thick tree. She was careful to avoid the plentiful parts of the area that were overflowing with poisonous plants and kinds that made one dizzy, which she had encountered many times before. When the basket was full, Yuna quickly made her way back to the village and headed straight to the inn. Good morning, Kamari. Yuna greeted her Ronso guardian, who had accepted the responsibility of keeping an eye on the stranger. However, Yuna understood that it was her who was being watched over. Kamari didn't talk much, and most of the time they didn't know what he was thinking in his head, but Yuna knew that he shared the same thought with his fellow guardians. He was there to protect her. Yuna thought it was unnecessary, but didn't do anything to stop them. They're her guardians, and her safety was their top priority. Seeing Yuna, the Ronso nodded his head in return, before opening the door for her. Yuna entered the room and immediately set her sight on him, the stranger who she and her guardians saved yesterday, now lying on a bed as they had moved him to a more comfortable room, with the majority of his body being wrapped in bandages. However, his injuries were bad enough that they had to change his bandages and rub more herbs on his wounds at least 2 or 3 times a day. Kneeling down next to his bed, Yuna could see that his breathing had become stable, which was a good news to Yuna because of yesterday, he was still on the verge of death. Reaching her hand forward, Yuna grabbed a small bowl on the table and selected a handful of herbs from her basket. Putting them in the bowl, Yuna began to crush them with a small pestle. The plants became wrinkly and soon, juice came out. Yuna kept doing that for 5 more minutes before putting the bowl away and brought out some new rolls of the bandage as well as a bowl of hot water and a clean towel. Standing up on her knees, Yuna gently lifted his head up and reached her hand out for the small knot behind his neck before untying it. As gently as she could, Yuna unraveled the bandages that were wrapped several times around his neck and face, before using a wet towel to wipe away the worn-off herbs on his left cheek. One of the more distinctive features about him, as Yuna had realized yesterday, was the whisker-like markings that lined each cheek in a horizontal pattern. It made him look like a fox, but Yuna thought it made him somewhat cute. When his cheek was clean, Yuna's lips slightly parted way in surprise when she saw no gash there. It was her who changed his bandages yesterday and last night. She was sure that there was a long cut all the way from his chin to his left ear there. Yuna made a sound in surprise before putting her hand on his cheek, gently caressing his skin to confirm her theory and making sure that her eyes didn't fool her. Shaking her head, Yuna turned around and picked up the bowl of herb on the ground. She brought it close to her face and took a sniff to make sure that she didn't pick anything strange, which was hardly unlikely because she was very careful with her picks. She let him use some potions too, but the herbs couldn't be that powerful, could it? Shrugging, Yuna returned her attention back to him and removed the bandages from his left arm. Unexpectedly for Yuna, there was nothing but the healthy skin there as well. Not even a scar was left on his arm. Did someone, a powerful magic user, sneak into the inn and healed him last night when they were asleep? Yuna had to wonder. However, Yuna believed it was impossible because she was the only white mage of the village. Strange, Yuna whispered as she looked at his face, with the bangs of his golden blonde hair completely overshadowing his eyes. Who are you? Yuna asked softly, more of curiosity than ever. She continued to remove the bandages around his chest, gently tracing the towel along the way. To say she was surprised was an understatement. No injury, no scar, no cut or gash or whatsoever, only healthy skin and well-defined muscles. When Yuna turned around and put the towel into the water, she suddenly heard a painful groan. Snapping her head around, Yuna's eyes widened in surprise when she saw him starting to move around, his eyes blinking rapidly. Impossible, Yuna muttered, and surprisingly enough, he heard it and turned to her. His eyes were still blinking rapidly to clear his vision. Between the fast blinks, Yuna could now see his eyes for the first time, which were a set of blue orbs that were so deep and beautiful she almost thought she could get lost in them for eternity. Wah! Wah! He muttered and tried to stand up, wincing painfully along the way. However, before he could hurt himself more, Yuna immediately reached both of her hands out and placed them on his shoulders. As gently as she could manage, she tried to keep him on his bed, preventing him from moving. Stop! Please stop moving around, you're still hurt, Yuna said comfortingly, but the man only turned his head toward her and gave the summoner a look of confusion. Yuna. Then suddenly, the door of the room was pushed open and entered Kamari. The Ronso must have heard her voice and entered immediately, to make sure that the girl he had been taking care of since she was 12 was alright. When the blonde-haired man saw Kamari, the result was almost instantly. He gasped slightly and flinched in surprise at the sight of such creature. He nearly sat up, his hands rising in defense, but Yuna immediately grabbed his wrists and stood up, using her body to block the tall Ronso from his view. It's alright, she said comfortingly, he's my friend. He's not going to hurt you. The man looked at her, blinking several times. At that moment when he looked into her eyes as if she was looking into her very soul, she didn't see any fear, only surprise and confusion. It's going to be alright, please, you have nothing to worry about. She promised him softly before turning her head around to look at her guardian. Kamari, can you leave me with him, please? I'll be alright, don't worry. The Ronso said nothing, he only nodded his head and left the room. However, the look on his face told her that he wouldn't hesitate to rush in again. Arg! Yuna immediately snapped her head back and saw him holding his right hip in pain when he heard another groan of pain. Please, you have to lie down. Placing his hands back to his shoulders, Yuna gently pushed him down, and much to her relief, he allowed her to do it this time. Thank you, she smiled. He cleared his throat, gulping heavily before opening his mouth to speak. Do you need anything? Yuna asked worriedly, are you thirsty? His eyebrow only furrowed, showing another expression of confusion. I don't understand what you are saying. He spoke while shaking his head, but it was Yuna's turn to look at him in confusion. Because she didn't understand what he was saying. He was speaking an entirely different language. You don't understand what I'm saying, are you? Yuna asked worriedly. She looked around for a moment before returning her eyes to him. Tui cbayg albed bnesa, do you speak albed prime? She asked in albed prime, the language of her mother's people, but when he only looked at her in confusion, she realized that he didn't understand it either. It's going to be really hard to try communicating with him. After taking a few seconds to decide what to do, Yuna sat down on the bed beside him and placed her hand on her chest. She patted it for a few times before pointing at her face, allowing him to know that the chest patting wasn't the main goal of such gesture. Yuna, realizing that she was trying to tell him her name, he nodded his understanding. Yuna, nodding her head with a beautiful smile, Yuna then held her hand out in a questioning manner. It didn't take him long to realize she was asking for his name in return. Naruto, he introduced, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto Uzumaki. Yuna repeated before smiling, nice to meet you, Naruto Uzumaki. Once again, Naruto didn't understand what she was saying after speaking his name out loud, but he said nothing. Instead, his eyes began to drift across the room, before noticing the old and new bandages on the table beside his bed and the smells of herbs on his body and her hands. Looking at Yuna, he couldn't help but wonder if she had been taking care of him. As he took a few seconds to look at the young woman, he must admit, she was very beautiful. Not the kind of beauty that would make someone lust over, but the natural kind that would make men like him sit down and stare for days. Yuna had shoulder-length brown hair and had heterochromia. Her left eye was blue, while the right was green, which made her beauty appear rather exotic. She wore a purple pleated, flower-patterned dress, black boots, a black spaghetti string camisole under a white sash that wraps around her neck and over her chest, and a yellow-patterned obi with a chocho musubi knot and a decorative obidome to clinch the cords. She finished her outfit with 2 separate, kimono-like sleeves. She also had a silver pendant wore around her neck, and a blue beaded earring on her right ear, hidden by a lock of her hair, woven into blue beads with gold rings around the larger, middle bead. Is there anything on my face? Her voice brought him out of his musing. The nervousness in her voice made Naruto realize that he had been staring at her for some time now, and she was a little uncomfortable with that. Taking his eyes away from her, Naruto could only laugh it off. Yuna then stood up and walked away, leaving Naruto alone on his bed. However, currently, this young woman wasn't his main concern. What he cared about, at the moment, was where he was. One moment he was fighting Sasuke at the Valley of the End, the two of them engaged in the middle of the battlefield with their respective techniques. The next, however, he was wrapped in a flash of light and moved away from the valley. The next instant, he was dropped into the middle of nowhere. He lost his conscience and couldn't remember anything else after that. The reason he passed out was probably because of a number of damages he's received from Sasuke. That bastard with a duck-ass haircut really didn't hold anything back, to the point his healing factor couldn't keep up with the bottle's pace. It was quite unfortunate that he didn't have a healing factor like his, so Naruto had taken a lot of pleasure in beating the shit out of him, knowing that without Sakura it would take months for the Uchiha to heal. Instead of day like him. Speaking of injuries, Naruto quickly ran a swift analysis on his body. From what he could tell, his external injuries had already been taken care of, but he couldn't say the same for internal, which was the reason it hurt so much every time he tried to move around. It would probably take him some more time to fully get back on his 2 feet. He couldn't sense any ill intention from Yuna, or that giant, lion-like man. So for the meantime, he guessed he could just stay on his new bed and rest for the time being. Here you go. Yuna returned to him with a call and a large of water in her hand. Water. She stated, hoping that it was obvious enough for him to understand. Water, Naruto repeated in Yuna's language. Obviously enough, that word was, water, in his language. I can do it myself. Naruto sat up, raising a hand to stop Yuna from helping him before accepting the cup from her hand with a smile. Thank you. He lowered his head gratefully, making Yuna smile. However, before Naruto could finish his cup of water, Yuna suddenly heard a scream from outside. What's going on? Naruto asked in confusion, but Yuna had already left the room, following right after Kamari, who had also heard the scream. Line break. Waka, what's going on? When Luna ran out of the inn, she caught sight of Waka and quickly caught up to him. He was holding his trademark weapon, a white blitzball with blue patterns in his hand. The children are being attacked by plant fiends. Waka said in a hurry as he pointed his hand to the outskirt of the nearby forest. Lu is already there, but we have to help her protect the kids. It didn't take them long to get there, and truth to his words, Lulu was standing protectively in front of the children of Besaid, shielding them from a group of plant fiends while casting fire spells, their major weakness, to burn them away. However, she was having a hard time dodging and protecting the children behind her from seeds that were fired by the fiends at extreme speed. The Rigora was a plant-type fiend that was weak against fire, but its ability, Seed Cannon, could even knock a grown man out cold. Watch out, Lu. Waka alerted the black mage before throwing his blitzball at the Rigora that was aiming its cannon at her, knocking it bad before being burned away by Lulu's fire spell. Bringing out his spear, Kamari joined in the fight, slashing the nearest Rigora before stabbing the tip into it, lifting it into the air and throwing it back to the forest. With a feral cry, Kamari stretched his arms horizontally and used his special ability, Lancet, causing energy orbs to be released from one of the fiends' body before being absorbed by the blue Ronso. The Rigora twisted around painfully and fell flat on the ground before dispersing into colorful orbs of light. Stand back, Yuna. Lulu said when she saw Yuna stepping forward. Let's us guardians handle them. Nodding her head, Yuna turned her attention to the group of children, leaving the horde of fiends to her 3 guardians, who stepped forward and engaged them. "Everyone, this way," she said loudly and gestured the kids to run in her direction. Most of them did, however, the last 2 were too scared to move an inch of their body. Without any choice, Yuna ran to their side and kneeled down on one knee in front of them, flashing them an encouraging smile before saying, "You have to move all right. Everything is going to be all right. We will protect you." The boy and girl nodded their heads, but before they could run away. "Watch out." She heard Waka's cry and turned her head around to see one of the Rigora firing its seed at her and the children after aiming at the small gap between Lulu and Waka. Instinctively, Yuna turned her body around and wrapped her arms around the 2 children, using her own body to shield them away from the incoming attack. She shut her eyes tightly and braced herself for the pain, but the attack had never come. "God fucking damn it." Yuna snapped her eyes open when he heard that painful cry. Despite not knowing that what he was saying, from the tone, she could tell that it was a curse. Turning around, Yuna dropped her jaw in shock when she saw the familiar figure of Naruto Uzumaki, kneeling on the ground with his back facing her and his hand holding his rib. Naruto Uzumaki. She looked at Waka and saw him stuttering. "He caught it." He exclaimed in shock. It was at that moment Yuna realized that Naruto had caught the large seed with his bare hand. Line break. With the children out of the battlefield, it didn't take Lulu, Waka and Kamari long to take care of the remaining of the horde. It was quite strange for them to see the fiends grouping together like that, but no one was harmed in the attack and that's the only thing that was matter to them. House. House. Naruto repeated the word and looked at the picture of a house in the book Yuna was holding. It was something she borrowed from a female teacher of the village to teach Naruto how to speak the basic words of their language. From what everyone could see, it seemed Yuna was enjoying it a lot. Fire. She pointed her hand to the fire in front of them. Naruto nodded his head and repeated the word without any trouble. Most of his bones had mended back to normal. It was a painful process, but he could move freely in the end. By tomorrow's morning, he would be back to his shape. As he sat there, enjoying Yuna's company, Naruto couldn't stop himself from glancing at her 3 friends, who were sitting not too far away from them, but 2 of them were keeping their eyes on Naruto cautiously as if they believed he was about to pull out a weapon from his pocket and kill the young woman before they could stop him. At least, as an act of friendliness, they had introduced their name to him. Waka was a tall and muscular man, with tan skin, brown eyes, and long reddish-orange hair styled into a coif and girded with a blue headscarf. He wore what appeared to be a uniform because he had seen some other men in the village wearing similar outfits. It consisted of a yellow vest top cut away at the stomach, a yellow shoulder pad on his left shoulder, blue and yellow baggy trousers gathered above the ankle, brown wristbands with a blue and yellow armguard over the left arm, and open sandals. He wore a dolphin necklace and had a silver stud earring on his left ear. He was the only one that wasn't looking at Naruto. Kamari Ronso was a tall and muscular leonine, with blue fur, white hair and beard, a long tail and a broken horn on his forehead. His ears were pierced, and his hair was held back in a ponytail and braided on the sides. He wore leather straps that hold in place his arm guards and his chest piece that had a skull motif. He wore ankle guards and a sash tied around his waist with a red belt. His shoulder guards had tufts of white feathers or fur. He didn't talk much, but the fact that he once heard him calling Yuna by her name, Kamari did know how to speak human language. The last, but not least, was a beautiful woman with black hair and matching color eyes. Her hair was braided in cornrows that led into a bun and long braids, except for her long forelock, which completely covered her left eye. The braids were tied into a knot with 4 ornamented pins, and 4 bead-tipped braids falling from it. She wore many accessories. A necklace of purple round beads, a small one of white beads, and another of red and blue beads, rings and many earrings. She used purple makeup and nail polish. For clothing, which was a stark contrast to the other residents of the island, she dressed in a low-cut dark gray and black dress that displays her large and generous cleavage, with 2 crossed belts on the upper part of each sleeve. The décolletage was trimmed in fur, and the hem and sleeves had ornate lace edges. The lower front of her gown was made of a collection of interlaced belts. She also wore a corset and lace-trimmed stockings. With red eyes and black hair, she reminded him of an Uchiha, but of course, she was no Uchiha. She was the one who had shown him a very magical ability that morning. Lulu was the one that took out the majority of the Rigora, as they were called, with her fire ability. Naruto didn't see her go through any hand seals or feel her harness chakra. She simply raised her hand above her head, her body flashed with light, and when she brought her hand down, the plant monster exploded, releasing a large amount of fire. Even without entering Senin Moto, Naruto could tell there was a difference in the spiritual energy she had harnessed to use her fire ability. Clearly, said energy was very different from chakra. Naruto sighed. It seemed he would be left in the dark until he was able to learn to speak Yuna's language frequently. With his clones, it shouldn't be a problem. Naruto Uzumaki, Naruto Uzumaki. Yuna called while looking at his face with curiosity. Deep in thought, Naruto didn't realize he had spaced out and sank deep in his own thoughts. Ahem, sorry. He cleared his throat and spoke apologetically before gesturing his hand to Yuna's book. Please continue. Good morning, everyone. Yuna greeted her guardians with a soft smile. What are you talking about? She couldn't help but ask when she realized they were talking to each other. Her guardians had seen more of the world than her, so their usual conversations about the past, as well as many random things, had always got her attention and interest. Oh, Yuna, good morning to you too. Waka turned his head around and smiled at her. We're discussing your new friend, Yuna. He answered, before turning his head to look at the mentioned friend, who was sitting by himself at the doorstep of the inn he was staying at. Naruto. The soon-to-be full-fledged summoner asked in surprise, what about him? She sat down on her knees next to Lulu and looked at Naruto. Their eyes met, and he smiled at her, a smile that she couldn't stop herself from returning while waving her hand at him. As you can see yourself, he's not a normal person, Yuna. Lulu started with the obvious fact, something they all had seen in the past 2 days. Even with the strongest healing white spell, no one should be able to heal as fast as he was. He was able to survive damages beyond imagination, and get back to his feet not even a day later, with only a few broken bones left inside him. Lulu turned her head slightly to the side and looked at Naruto, and now, this morning, he walks around like a normal, as if his life was never on the line, like when you found him 2 days ago. Well, not to mention that he was able to catch a cannon seed with his bare hand Yuna. Waka reminded her, you have to be a skilled fighter to react to one, and yet he caught it without any problem. Also, did you wonder how did he get to you and the kids so fast, ya? Yuna shook her head. A normal human being shouldn't be able to move that fast, let alone an injured one. Those are some inhuman feats, ya. He finished, folding his hands together behind his head. So you're saying that, Yuna said slowly. Whatever he is, Yuna, he's not normal. Lulu nodded her head seriously. He can't just randomly appear out of nowhere in a state like that. He also speaks a different language, meaning that he's not from here. You should be more careful around. That's it. However, before Lulu could finish giving her warning to Yuna, she was interrupted by a loud and sudden shout, which belonged to none other than Naruto Uzumaki. Turning their heads around, they saw him standing on his feet, with his fist on the palm of his right hand and a wide grin on his face. Naruto then turned his head around, searching for a wide area. How could I forget? He voiced his thought aloud before making his way to the outskirt of the village near the forest. Out of curiosity, many villagers decided to follow him, wanting to see what he's up to. Yuna and her guardians were no exceptions, as they all stood up onto their feet and went after him. Naruto. Naruto. Yuna called and quickly caught up to him. Oh, it's you. Good morning, Yuna. Naruto didn't have to turn around to know it was Yuna, who was surprised when she heard him greeting her in Spirit. She was the only one in the village addressed him as his name. The rest, meanwhile, addressed him differently, but by no means hostilely. The people of Besaid village were quite friendly, to say the least, especially after he saved Yuna and the kids from getting hurt or worse the day before. Last night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Naruto created numerous shadow clones of himself and sent them across the country to shove the language problem. Without a proper education, it took him all night and hundreds of clones to learn Spirin, the language of the people of Spira, the world he was brought to, but when he woke up in the morning, he could speak and understand Spira's language quite easily. Still, there were words that he didn't understand, and he didn't know how to read, but Naruto didn't mind that much. How did you? Yuna gasped in surprise, an expression she shared with her guardians. I'm a fast learner, and you're a pretty good teacher. He praised, causing Yuna to look at him strangely before chuckling while scratching the back of his head. Well, actually, I have my own way, you see. Is that so? Yuna blinked, numerous questions raced through her head. Where are you going? I want to try something. Naruto stopped and double-checked the area to make sure that there was no structure around. When the place was clear, Naruto turned around and looked at Yuna. You and everyone might want to stand back a little. Oh, alright. The summoner nodded her head and took a step back. Naruto turned back to the front and raised his hand to bite on his thumb, which surprised Yuna and the other. He then spread the blood on his open palm before putting his hands together and went through a familiar sequence of hand seals. When he was done, Naruto raised his hand above his head and slammed it down to the ground before announcing the name of the technique he was too familiar with. Kuchio's no Jutsu. At first, nothing happened, and Naruto stood there on one of his knees, feeling like an idiot. However, after 5 seconds of waiting, black symbols spread around the spot where his palm was, and the entire area in front of him suddenly exploded in a giant plume of smoke that seemingly came out of nowhere. The villagers then cried out in shock when a massive sword was stabbed down to the earth, with enough force to make a huge crack and shake the ground. Yuna instinctively brought out her magic rod and held it in front of her chest in a defensive stance, while her guardians brought out their weapons and got ready to protect the summoner against the owner of such huge-ass sword, whoever or whatever they would be. Soon enough, the wind picked up a little and it caused the smoke to be blown away, revealing what had just arrived. Oops, Naruto said absently when he saw the amount of tree that had been crushed under his partner's weight. He would have to do something about it later, though. Standing in front of them was a giant toad easily the size of a small mountain with dull, dark orange skin, with purple markings around his eyes, mouth and stomach. He wore a dark jacket, with bandages wrapped around its torso. In addition to this, he also wore a necklace with a large bead and held a cigarette in its mouth. Oi, Gamakichi. Down here, Naruto cried out as loud as he could as he waved his hand, trying to gain his partner's attention. Naruto. The toad thundered happily and spread his arm as if he wanted to hug the tiny young man. You're alive. Where the hell have you been? What is this place? Gamakichi asked while looking around. Dear Yevon, was all anyone could say as they looked at Gamakichi with their eyes wide in utter shock. They had never seen anything like it in their life. Even Yuna, who had seen a lot of amazing and powerful Ians in her life, couldn't express what she was feeling at the sight of a giant, talking toad. It's a long story. Naruto answered before turning his head around, speaking in Spirin. Everyone, this is my friend, his name is Gamakichi. He then turned back to Gamakichi, who waved his front limb and greeted the villagers with the usual, Yo, Gamakichi, these are the people that saved me when I was brought here 2 days ago. This is Yuna. He introduced, gesturing his hand to Yuna. Gamakichi-sama, it's a pleasure to meet you. Yuna spread her arms before making a bowing gesture with her hands put in front of her. The same gesture Naruto's clones had seen a lot from the citizens during their trip around Spiral last night. Must be something tradition, he mused. Hey, don't know what she is saying, but she definitely has more manner than you. Gamakichi said as he pointed his finger at Yuna, causing Naruto to cross his arms on his chest and huff with a pout. So, where are we again? Spira. Excuse me. Gamakichi asked in surprise, not on elemental nations. Naruto nodded with his eyes closed. Should he feel surprised because he was brought to a whole different world? The answer was no, he should not after he had witnessed Kagaya Otsutsuki created multi-dimensions with her godly power with his own eyes, and learnt that she and the Sage of Sixth Path wasn't someone from his world. When Sasuke Uchiha told us what happened to you, we didn't believe him. He said you had disappeared in a flash of light. Guess he was telling the truth then. Well, I couldn't blame you. He was a traitor a few days ago. Even I don't know what his true motive is. Naruto responded with a nod of his head. Anyway, Gamabunta, how is everyone? Gamakichi crossed his hand on his chest as he began. Through his Rinnegan, combined with the chakra of the nine-tailed beasts, Sasuke Uchiha was able to remove Mugen Tsukuyomi and freed everyone from that genjutsu. He felt guilty for what had happened between you two, But, he was thrown into custody as soon as he revealed what had happened to you to everyone. He didn't resist. Only Sakura Haruno and Kakashi Hatake trusted him, but there's not much they could do. I see, Naruto nodded his head. A small, sad smile appeared on his face as he listened to Sasuke's fate. Guess that everyone is looking for me, huh? You bet. Gamakichi said, the corner of his lips curved up as he said, you're now the hero of the 4th Shinobi War, so literally the entire world is searching for you now, even the tailed beasts. They're going to be pleased when they hear that you're okay. He then paused for a second before saying, so, did you figure it out how you get her and how to return to your village? Well, I'm about to tell you right now. Naruto nodded his head, could you use reverse summoning too? Sorry bro, but we have already tried that. Gamakichi shook his head, Fukasaku-sama and Shima-sama have been trying to reverse summon you constantly for the past few days because you've become too powerful for me to summon alone. They refused to give up even after you didn't appear before us. Aw man, I was hoping that could return home through that way. Naruto said disappointingly while scratching the back his head. Don't worry, now that we know where you are, maybe we can come up with a way to bring you back. Gamakichi gave him a smile and a thumb up, causing the disappointment to disappear from Naruto's face as he sighed and smiled at his partner. I will go back to Mount Myoboku now and tell everyone that you're okay. Call me again if you need anything, okay? Definitely, Naruto nodded while grinning, and oh, tell Tsunade-ba-chan to go easy on Sasuke will ya? I will. Gamakichi nodded before disappearing in an explosion of smoke, nearly knocking everyone back. Line break. Not even a week had passed and he already felt homesick. Lying on the doorstep of the inn with his hand behind his head and one leg over another, Naruto couldn't stop himself what everyone was doing. Did Sasuke really feel guilty after everything that had happened? After all, before receiving a royal beating from him and nearly taking their arms away, he had made a promise of placing everyone under his control and ridiculous ideal. He thought about Kurama, the other half of Kurama. He had a conversation with the yin half inside of him last night, and since he only knew Naruto for a short amount of time, there was no much of an advice he could give his new Jinchuriki. He could still the chakra of the other tailed beasts inside of him, but he couldn't communicate with them like what Hagoromo had said he could. He was worried that something had happened to them, because the last time he saw them, they were still trapped inside Sasuke's technique, but he heard they were out searching for him too like the rest. He felt relief. Would the people of elemental nations still afraid of them now? Naruto didn't know the answer to that question. After all, Kurama had been of great help during the war. They even fought side by side with the alliance of shinobi. Surely they would view him and the others differently from this point on. He thought about his life, his dream. So much had happened. Naruto-sama. Deep in thought, he didn't notice Yuna until she was standing right in front of him. Sitting up from his position, Naruto flashed her a small smile. Oh hey Yuna, I didn't see you coming. The blonde said as Yuna took the seat next to him. What's up? Nothing, Naruto-sama. I just thought that you might need someone to talk to. Yuna shrugged as she smiled at him. When you're talking to Gamakichi-sama, I couldn't help but notice that your smiles were quite sad. It's that obvious huh? The shinobi chuckled, but then noticed the strange respectfulness Yuna was using to address him. Hold on, what's this, Sama? Crap. Yuna gasped lightly in surprise, I'm doing it wrong. She wondered her thought aloud, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow in curiosity before asking. Doing what wrong? He returned her answer before saying, Yuna, there's no need for you to address me so respectfully like that. You can call me Naruto. Normal wasn't the right word to describe him, but it was convincing enough for him to tell Yuna to drop the suffix which didn't go well with his name at all. If you instinct, Naruto. Yuna smiled before looking away from him. Naruto, Gamakichi-sama, what is he? Gamakichi. He's a toad. Naruto answered the obvious, causing Yuna to turn her head back to look at him. Well, you know, from where I came from, we don't have a specific name for them. But I think I can call him a summoning, or something like that. Is he an Eon? Eon. Naruto repeated the word, curiosity got the better of him. What's that? Eons are powerful creature blessed to summoners by the faith. Yuna said as she pointed her hand to the temple, the largest building of the village at the other side of the street. Summoners from all over the world come here to pray to the faith in hope of gaining the servitude of an eon. There are many temples like that all over Spira, and summoners will come to visit each temple in our pilgrimage and pray for them to receive the power to call forth their eons. I see, you seem to know a lot about this. Is it common knowledge around here or something? The young woman nodded her head. So, are you a summoner, Yuna? Naruto asked. Me? Oh no, Yuna shook her head and denied it while smiling embarrassedly. I'm not a summoner, not just yet. I'm only an apprentice summoner. That's mean you can become a summoner. Yes, when I pass Besaid Temple's Cloister of Trials and gain my first Eon, Valifor, I will become a full-fledged summoner and start my own pilgrimage. Naruto nodded his head in understanding. That sounded really cool. You make it seem like you're a priestess or something, you know. Naruto grinned before continuing. You see, as far as I can tell, Gamakichi is definitely not an Eon. He's one of the toads from Mount Myoboku, and we gain their services by signing a contract. Mount Myoboku. Yeah, that's where all the toads live. Naruto explained. In my language, it's also known as Mountain of Bewilderment and the Land of the Toad. It's a very rich and beautiful land, with forests spread as far as you can see. It sounds really amazing. Yuna smiled. I wish I could see it for myself someday. Well, sorry to say this but, you probably won't. It's not around here, in Spira. Naruto then turned his eyes to Yuna, curiously asking her, you know, I'm somewhat surprised that you trust everything I told you. Shouldn't you, well you know, be a little more careful around me? Since I'm a stranger and all. You shouldn't think about it, Naruto. She shook her head. I know you're a good person. That clearly not convincing enough, you know. The blonde chuckled, drawing a soft giggle from Yuna. After a while, their laughter finally stopped, and Naruto said gratefully, thank you, Yuna, for saving my life. He lowered his head a little to show her his gratitude. It's nothing, Naruto. Yuna raised her hands and replied, I didn't do anything. I found you, but it was Waka who took you to the beach. Still, I'm in your debt. Naruto grinned. Waka, Kamari and Lulu, they're more than just friends for you, right? Yes, Kamari have been taking care of me since I was young, while Lulu and Waka grew up with me in Besaid. They're like my big brother and big sister. Yuna smiled fondly. They're also my guardians, warrior tasked with protecting the summoner during their pilgrimage across Spira. I see, you know, they don't seem to like me much. It was something he could see as clear as daylight. That's nothing you should worry about, Naruto. Yuna smiled in response. Well, if you say so. Naruto shrugged. Naruto, can you tell me more about where you came from? You're interested in these stuffs? He questioned curiously. Well, it's just, I have never seen much of the world, you know. All my childhood I have been staying on this island, training to become a summoner and readying myself to go on my own pilgrimage to defeat sin. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, but decided to keep quiet for the time. He also decided not to question about her parents. Seeing none of them was around, it might be a sensitive and emotional subject. I have always wanted to travel and see many different places for myself, so when you told me you're not from here, she then smiled at him while waving her hand around, but of course, if it troubles you, you don't have to. Naruto smiled. Alright, he turned his body around, facing her before crossing his legs. Where should I start? So you mean? Yep, I will tell you everything I know about my home. Hell, maybe someday I can even take you there so you can see it with your eyes. A large smile spread on Yuna's lips. However, in exchange, you will tell me everything I need to know about this world. I'm a new guy here, so I will need you to fill me in the basic detail. Deal? Yes, Naruto. You're supposed to say deal, but we will take care of that later. Naruto shook his head before crossing his arms on his chest. Now, where should I start? Yes, I'm from a village called Konoha. For the first time in a while, Naruto had truly felt at peace. What he had experienced in the Fourth Shinobi War and his conversation with Sasuke during their final battle at the Valley of the End had changed him in a way not even Naruto could think possible. It made him more mature and gave him a different perspective, a different view of life. This world, Spira, it had the peace he was seeking all his life. It wasn't his home. It wasn't the world he fought to protect. But somehow, he felt at peace more than ever. Maybe it was because of the people around him. Yuna, who had no idea who he was, or what he truly capable of. To them, he was just another human being, a man who Yuna and her summoners saved one morning. And could heal from fatal damages in less than 2 days, summon a giant toad, but that was beside the point. Of course, he should have known better that the peace he found wasn't going to last. When he woke up the next morning, he woke up and couldn't find Yuna anywhere. Sin. It was the name of the creature that had been threatening and terrorizing the world of Spira for the past 1,000 years. In addition, from what he learnt from Yuna, Sin was the punishment for their ancestors relying on machina, or machines, and becoming a hedonistic society. Summoners were people who embarked on pilgrimages across Spira to pray to the faith of each temple to obtain the power of the eons they created. All summoners' goal was to obtain the final eon and to use its power to defeat Sin, because apparently, said eon was the only being powerful enough to defeat the creature and bring forth the calm, an uncertain amount of time of peace in Spira between Sin's defeat at the hands of a summoner and its next public appearance. The first calm lasted 500 years, with subsequent periods being shorter, as Sin mysteriously kept coming back, stronger than before. Apparently, it was stated in the teachings of Yevon, which apparently was Spira's religion, if the people of Spira atoned for their sin, then one day Sin would disappear and not regenerate upon its next defeat. Nearly all the peoples of Spira follow the teachings of Yevon, calling themselves Yevonites, save for the Al-Bed, who were viewed as heretics by the autocracy for their use of machina, a practice forbidden by the church. However, it was not what he worried about. In the long history of Sin terrorizing Spira, there had been 4 periods of time known as the Calm, and conditionally, Yuna's father, High Summoner Braska, was the latest defeater of Sin. However, his calm only lasted less than a year, as Sin returned and started destroying Spira again, driving Yuna to become a summoner and follow her father's footsteps. Because of who her father was, Yuna was believed to be the most potential summoner to defeat Sin and bring the next calm. However, from what he could see, it was basically a suicide mission, because no matter what happened, no matter how strong the final eon is, the summoner will still die in the end. When he asked about it, Yuna only shook her head and said it didn't matter, as long as she could bring hopes back to the people of Spira. He shouldn't expect anything less from a devout follower of Yevon, but still, it was a very noble of her. At the age of 17, she was only a year older than he was, and yet she had already carried the hopes and faiths of millions on her shoulders. In a way, Yuna reminded him of himself during the Pain invasion and the climax of the Fourth Shinobi War. He had never met or seen Sin before, but it sounded very powerful and terrible. Still, it couldn't be as terrible as Jubi, right? He would love to give Sin a try and see if it could handle a full-power Bijudama to the head. If possible, he would love to help Spira getting rid of the beast before returning back to his world. That's the reason why that morning he intended to summon Gamakichi and ask him to tell others about his plan, so they wouldn't bring him back for the time being if they had already figured it out a way to do that. Elemental nations had finally found peace, but Spira hadn't. He wouldn't be Naruto Uzumaki if he left a world at the mercy of a menacing beast forever. But he needed to talk to Yuna about it first. Good morning, Naruto-sama. The moment Naruto walked out of the inn, the villagers greeted him with the same respect they had for Yuna, bowing their heads deeply with their hands in front of their chest, palm facing as if they were holding a sphere. Naruto couldn't help but groan in annoyance. Ever since he summoned Gamakichi, Naruto had been given the same kind of respect Yuna, a real summoner, had. Apparently, since he could summon a gigantic creature with the size of a medium-sized mountain, toad or not, they believed him to be a summoner, much like Yuna. Summoners were highly respected around Spira, as they're those who risked their lives and went on journeys, or pilgrimages to defeat Sin. Guys, for the last time, I'm not a summoner. Yuna is. He tried to reason. It was the thing he had been trying to tell them since last night. Yuna summons eons, Gamakichi is not an eon. He is simply an oversized toad that can talk. In a way, they weren't wrong when they called him summoner. After all, the toads of Mount Myoboku was indeed summonings, and the ones who signed their contracts and summoned them in battle were, obviously, call summoners, just call me Naruto. Fortunately for them, they didn't have to respond to that request of Naruto when Waka arrived and came to their rescues, carrying a blitz ball in his hand. Good morning Naruto. The reddish-orange-haired man greeted before looking at the village, who all greeted him with smiles. "Good morning, everyone." "Naruto, what are you doing so soon in the morning, ya?" "I have something in mind and want to tell Yuna," he answered, and Waka nodded his head in understanding. "Speaking of which, I haven't seen her since last night. Do you know where she is?" Yuna was usually the center of attention of the village, so it's not that hard for him to find her. "Oh, you don't know. She has gone into the temple's cloister of trials with Lulu and Kamari to pray for the faith and become a summoner earlier this morning." Upon saying that, Waka and the villagers made their religious bowing gesture before he continued. "She went to sleep early last night, so you probably couldn't see her around, ya." "Is that so?" Naruto crossed his arms together. "So, we wait. Yeah, we guardians help her pass the first trials, but after that, the rest is up to Yuna. So what are you doing out here? You're her guardian too, right?" Naruto couldn't help but ask. "I'm out here training Blitz with my team, the Besaid Aurochs," Waka declared proudly while spinning the ball on the tip of his index finger. Seeing the confused look on Naruto's face, he asked in surprise, "You didn't know what blitzball is?" "Well, beat me. Aside from the fact that you use this ball as a weapon, I have no idea what it is." Naruto shrugged, making Waka drop his jaw in shock as his casual reply. "You know, Yuna told us you're not from around here, which explain why you didn't speak Spirit at first." And that was a huge understatement, but seriously, are you sure you didn't hit your head somewhere? Blitzball has been around for so long, and yet you have no idea what it is. "Where I came from, we don't have time for sport, at least, not in this form," Naruto explained while scratching the back of his head. He then took the ball from Waka's hand and observed it very carefully. "So what is so special about it anyway?" It was a spherically studded ball about 30 centimeters in diameter. The ball was also light, extremely so, but he had seen Waka using it to strike down a plant-like fiend with ease. Maybe there was something magical about it, but overall, it looked completely normal for him. Ever since Sin emerged, blitzball had become Spira's main form of entertainment, and is embraced by the Yevon faith. He said, bowing, "The annual blitzball tournament is a festival where all the peoples of Spira overcome racial barriers to banish thoughts of sin from their minds. This is the only time. The players fight with all their strength, the fans cheer for their favorite teams. Everyone forget pain, suffering. Only the game matters. That's why Blitz has been around for so long. Least that's what I think." "Least that's what you think," Naruto repeated, before shrugging. "Well, sound interesting enough, so how do you play it?" He bounced the ball on the ground before exchanging it between his hands. "Definitely not like that." Waka laughed while shaking his head. "You see, you have to play it underwater." Naruto raised an eyebrow at that, but then reminded himself that he was currently staying in a different world where he still had much to learn. The objective is for the player and their team to kick the blitzball into the opposing team's goal, while the opposing team simultaneously defends their goal and attempts to steal the blitzball to make an attempt at the player's goal. Sounds simple. Naruto nodded. "So you're basically a part-time guardian and part-time blitzball player. Two of the most important jobs in the world. Interesting life, huh?" "I suppose," Waka said sheepishly while scratching the back of his head. "What about you, Naruto?" "What do you do?" "I'm a shinobi." "A what?" "Shinobi." Naruto repeated. "You don't have ninja around here." Waka shook his head in confusion. "Well, basically, we're mercenaries. We would on job requests from people who wanted our help, regardless of what it is, anything from simple chores like cleaning the floor, escorting an important figure, to assassination of high-profile targets. You name it, and we did it, for the right price." "So basically, you killed people for money?" Waka asked in disbelief, and Naruto nodded his head. "What are you thinking, man? How can you possibly live a life like that?" "Well, it's our life, you know." Naruto shrugged, crossing his arms on his chest. "You either live a normal life of a civilian or become a shinobi and work for your village, being a part of something bigger. Shinobi and kunoichi, female ninja, are trained from a young age in combat. I myself had been trained since 5 years old." Waka widened her eyes in horrification. How could someone train kids to fight at such a young age? "I must admit that our lives aren't the most colorful, but I can't change them, only make it better, somehow." He trailed off. He didn't know how things were going to be after the war, or how it was currently, but he hoped that it was for the better. Now that the villages had united into one, there's a chance that elemental nations would finally know peace. Well, you know, Naruto, I don't know about your life and I probably won't know a thing about the hardships you have to come through, Waka said as he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, but there is one thing that I can tell, is that you're a good man, just like what Yuna said about you. Waka then crossed his arms on his chest. You know what, yeah. A young man like you doesn't have to live a life like that. Have you ever thought about a normal life before? I mean, look around, he said, looking at the village of Besaid Island. Isn't it peaceful around here, yeah? With sin roaming freely around, destroying every city it comes across. Naruto asked, amused. Hey man, that's not something you should joke about. Naruto simply raised both of his hands, making no comment. What I'm trying to say is that if you want to have a peaceful life, don't you think that this is the perfect place for a start over? Waka shook his head. You're young, maybe even younger than Yuna, you still have a whole life ahead of you. Don't you ever want to have a simple life, to have a family, to have children and to raise them, not as a mercenary or a killer or an assassin or a shinobi or whatsoever, but as a normal man, yeah. Naruto shrugged, but he had to admit, it was a rather pleasant thought. I hope it's that easy, Naruto said with a heavy sigh. All his life Naruto had dreamed about becoming the leader of his village. His parents died the day he was born, and Naruto grew up knowing nothing about them. He was hated by the villagers of Konoha for what he had inside of his body, and because of this, loneliness was something Naruto was very familiar with. The past 7 years he had been doing everything to prove himself, and to have the acknowledgement of the people of his village. Along the way, he gained friends, people who cared about him and believed in him. They became what Naruto could call his family, and would do anything to protect them. Could he leave all of them, his friends, his family, his dream and everything he had worked so hard for, behind and start a new life here at Spira, where, like Waka said, he could start a simple, normal and peaceful life, something Naruto wasn't sure he could have once he returned to elemental nations. Anyway man, that's something for you to decide. Waka spoke up, pulling Naruto out of his own thoughts. Anyway, I need to meet up with my team right now, so if you don't have anything to do, feel free to come to the beach and blitz with us. It's fun, so why don't you give it a try? Alright then, maybe I will give it a try, as soon as I finish breakfast. Waka grinned and nodded his head. Oh, I almost forgot. Waka was about to walk away when suddenly he remembered something and decided to turn around to ask Naruto, you're more or less a fighter, yeah? You don't use Makina as weapons, right? Makina. Naruto shook his head. No, we shinobi have never found much use in them. We have our own shinobi gears, weapons to fight in battle, but more or less we fight with our own abilities. Naruto replied shortly with a shrug of his shoulders. Thank Yevon for that, Waka said in relief while making the bowing gesture. So, see you later then. Line break. Alright Naruto, let's try it. Waka cried, waving a hand above his head before holding both of them in front of his chest, palms facing away from him. Naruto stood a few feet away from him with a smirk on his face, his hand holding the blitz ball. Give me your best shot. Here you go. Doing what he was told, Naruto dropped the ball and kicked right into it the moment it was within reach, sending it toward Waka. Not bad, bro. The reddish-orange-haired man caught it and smiled. Here, try catching this. He kicked the ball, and Naruto caught it easily. Too easily to be exact. It would be a whole lot different underwater, but since you can react to and catch a cannon seed with your bare hand, I don't think that would be a problem. Waka pointed to his teammate. Now, try to pass it to Jasu. Try kicking it harder this time. Well, you ask for it. Naruto nodded and turned to the short blonde-haired man standing at the far side of the beach. He had been introduced to Waka's team Besaid Orox this morning. Dropping the ball, Naruto kicked it so hard that it nearly disappeared from sight and reappeared when air friction slowed it down, passing Jasu's head and heading to the ocean while going up. My bad, Naruto raised his hand. Maybe he shouldn't kick the ball that hard. Wow, for real, yeah? Waka asked, excited when he saw the ball kept traveling for 2 more seconds before falling down. You have potential, maybe you should join our team. Nah, don't think that's a good idea. Naruto grinned while shaking his head. I will get the ball. He volunteered before walking toward the ocean. However, before his feet could reach the water, a person suddenly emerged from the sea, looking around in confusion before the ball fell down and whacked him bluntly on the top of his head, forcing him to yell out in surprise. He spun around sluggishly, vigorously rubbing where the object had made an impact. He seemed to quickly notice the people standing on the shoreline. "Oh man," Naruto muttered while scratching the back of his head, hoping that he wasn't hurt by that harsh impact. Then he tried to swim toward them, but before he could reach further, the object that struck him suddenly bobbed past his line of vision. "Blitzball!" he cried, his eyes lit up with pure delight, and clutched the ball firmly in his hands. "Hey, you okay?" Waka yelled while waving his hand in the air. The young man dropped the ball and waved his arms in return. He then dived back into the water before shooting up out over the surface, bringing the ball with him into the air. The young man twisted his body around and kicked the ball, sending it colliding back to the Besaid Aurochs captain, who moved his head to the side to dodge the ball. "Whoa ho!" Waka gasped in amazement as he turned his head back to look at the young man who was swimming toward them. "Professional player?" Naruto asked when he saw the look on the taller man's face. "Yes." Waka grinned, crossing his arms on his chest. "Not many players can do that, a move like that." As he approached them slowly, Naruto got a chance to get a good look at him. He didn't look much older than Naruto was, and had blue eyes and disheveled blonde hair with spiky layers. He wore a yellow jacket with a white hood, dark pants with one shorter and one longer trouserla, a black glove on his right hand, a gauntlet on the other, with blue pauldron and armor over his left arm. He completed his outfit with a dark dungaree-type outfit he wore over his other clothes, fastened with a black belt that had a metal chain. He rubbed the back of his head awkwardly as the whole team of Besaid Aurochs turned in and surrounded him, completely awestruck. "Yo, hiya," he said meekly while scratching the back of his head. Waka stepped forward and greeted him with a stunned smile. "You wanna try that move one more time, ya?" And he did. "Whoa," the team murmured, watching with wide eyes as he sent the ball speeding off again like a bullet over the sea. They'd never seen a shot like it being performed with such ease before. The redhead folded his arms contentedly. "You're no amateur. Who you play for, ya?" he asked with a chuckle. Titus beamed proudly. "The Zanarkand Aves." Their faces dropped instantly, began to mumble dubiously around him with suspicious gazes, while Naruto could only look at the man in confusion. Hadn't Zanarkand been destroyed over 1,000 years ago? "What team you say again?" the redhead inquired with narrow eyes, unable to believe his ears. The blonde screwed his face up prudently. "I meant, forget that," he retorted, shaking his head. "I got too close to sin and my head's all foggy like," he explained loosely. "So I don't know where this place is, or even where I came from." His head dropped despondently. The team gasped in horror at the sudden mention of sin. It was clear that these people were all too familiar with the carnage that it was capable of. "Sin's toxin got to you," Wakar confirmed gravely, "but you're still alive," he added hopefully, dispelling the bad vibe in the air. "Praise be to Yevon." He and the rest of the team bowed. Waka then told his team, "All right team, back to practice." His teammates nodded their heads and immediately got back to their positions. "I'm Waka, and this is Naruto," he introduced, turning back to Titus, taking his hand tightly in a firm handshake. "I'm the coach and captain of the Besaid Aurochs. Nice to meet you," Naruto greeted casually with his hands in his pockets. "I'm Titus, nice to." Titus would have gratefully returned their friendly introductions, but his stomach beat him to it, growling like some kind of caged beast. "What, you hungry?" Waka quizzed with a cheeky grin, gesturing for Titus to follow him. "All right, back to the village. I'll get ya something." The rest of the morning passed quickly after that. Line break. The more time passed, the more worried he became. After taking a short lunch break, Naruto walked out of the inn and decided to search for Waka and ask if Yuna was okay. Quickly spotting him walking into the temple with Titus, Naruto decided to head to the place as well. It was his first time inside the temple, and he couldn't help but feel amazed at the impressive structure, because while he had seen many great places in his life, the temple was fascinating, to say the least. The building was made of what seemed to be some form of chalky blue stone that shone inertly in the glowing rays of the sun, while extending down over the extent of the exterior was the great clamshell roof, which was big enough to cover the long path leading up to the temple entrance itself. Slowly the young shinobi passed down the long searching path leading up to the entrance. As he ventured closer he felt a cold breeze escape the dark chamber within, a breeze that chilled his very bones to the core. A great weight bore down upon his shoulders as he stepped foot in the threshold, a weight that seemed to inhabit the dense air. Instantly a strange song enveloped him, filling his ears with its sweet melody. Who is singing? Naruto couldn't help but ask, turning his head around but couldn't find any singers. Shrugging his shoulder, Naruto made his way further into the place, meeting a large circular room with a dark stone floor. The middle of the cold, hard surface covered in ancient symbols, all of which were completely unreadable to Naruto simply because he didn't know how to read spirit. The whole place was dim, being lit only by the red glow of 2 torches illuminating the staircase at the far end of the room. The curved walls at either side were adorned with many rows of statues, set above each other, statues of many people all dressed in ceremonial-type robes. However, his attention was drawn toward 4 specific great statues, 2 standing either side of the staircase. They were huge in stature, towering greatly over the others. Above these, leaning out of the walls and reaching to the ceiling, were 2 even bigger idols. One was a scantily clad woman adorned with pieces of jewelry hung down from her body. The other was an extremely masculine man that wore thick armor. Some people of the village were scattered about, all kneeling and worshipping the strange idols, and upon seeing Naruto, they all greeted him with their religious bow. Simply raising his hand to greet them, Naruto turned his attention toward Waka, who was talking to Titus about the temple. "Hey Waka, how's Yuna doing?" he asked concernedly, but Waka only shook his head with a deep expression on his face. Sighing longingly, Naruto decided to take a trip around the room. Proceeding toward one of the 4 statues, he settled with the one on the far right. It was a statue of a man with long hair, standing proud and prone in a large robe made of broad overlapping petals or leaves that fell in points, and had long wide sleeves that fell to cover the hands. He held a long staff in his hand and wore a strange, complicated design hat on his head. "It's Lord Braska." Naruto turned his head slightly to the side and looked at an old monk as he walked toward him. "It's been 10 years he became a high summoner." "Braska, this is Yuna's father?" Naruto asked, slightly surprised. The monk nodded his head to answer his question. In a way, one could say that Yuna kind of reminded him of himself. Their fathers were both big deals, and they had all sacrificed their lives for the sake of peace, leaving their children behind to continue their legacy. Maybe it was the reason why he felt so comfortable around her, not just because of her personalities. "You could at least go see how they are doing." Naruto was drawn out of his thoughts when he heard the voice of another monk. And to his expectation, Waka was the one who answered that question. "We can't interfere. It's rule," he argued. The monk persisted, his voice steeped in worry, "But, it's been nearly a day already." It was an elder man, a villager, who said that. "Is it particularly dangerous in there?" Titus questioned while scratching the back of his head. "Sometimes, yes. Why don't you go in and help?" he continued, surprised at Waka's laid-back approach. "There are already other guardians in there," Waka replied, looking sidelong at the blonde. "Besides, it's forbidden." Listening to their argument, Naruto grew anxious and began to walk around impatiently. "Hey, but what if something happens?" he exclaimed, completely vexed. What if the summoner dies? And that was it for Naruto. The precepts must be obeyed. The monk decreed furiously in an attempt to halt the blitzball player. "Like I care." Titus turned on his heels and charged forward, leaving the whole temple to gasp in horror at his action. However, before he could make it anywhere close to the doors, Naruto appeared beside him and knocked him out of the way with a simple push of his elbow. "Stay down, Titus," Naruto said, pointing his hand at Titus. "Hey, what's wrong with you, man?" "Thanks, Yevon, we have you here with us." Naruto saw. "What are you doing?" The monk cried out in shock when Naruto pushed the door open and invited himself in. As soon as the doors were closed behind him, Naruto started running and making his way through the dark hallways inside. After a while, he arrived at a room that was a lot smaller than he'd thought. In fact, it was more of a box room with 3 tall slab walls. His eyes widened slightly when he saw no door and realized there was no way out. This must be the cloister of trials Yuna and Waka were talking about. Naruto nodded his head, looking around the room as he carefully examined it. "All right, show me what you got." he said challengingly, as if there was someone else there beside him. As if to respond to his challenge, the walls lit up. Naruto took a step forward and observed strange symbols and glyphs appear upon the huge stone slabs before his attention was drawn to the other side of the room, where a large, bizarre compass-shaped symbol appeared and glowed dimly in a fluorescent green hue. Reaching forward, Naruto placed his hand on it, wondering what would happen. The glyph pulsed momentarily in a flash of cerise light, and in the corner of his eye, Naruto saw the white symbols upon the side wall fade away and was replaced with a smaller replica of the compass. Taking this as a sign, Naruto approached the symbol and once again touched it with his hand. Naruto took a step back as the wall shuddered, and dust spewed from its sides as it began to move slowly, hoisting itself up, revealing a path with staircase led to down underneath the temple, lit by dim torchlight much like the room he was in. The way through the trials from here, he found, was simpler than he'd expected. Naruto couldn't stop himself from wondering how the place had got its name, because it was far from a trial to him. Most of the oncoming pathways were blocked by sturdy wooden doors, which Naruto could simply knock down with a punch in Sennin-moto, but decided he didn't want to have the villagers of Besaid Island at his throat. He discovered many spheres around the room, and all he had to do was insert them into the right hole, also all around the place. After several doors and puzzles, Naruto found himself facing another dead end. There were no symbols or glyphs to touch and no doors to be entered. However, there was a pattern in the middle of the floor, adorned with majestic colors. Hey! Before he could take another step, Naruto heard a voice and turned around to see Waka advancing toward him with a weak smile on his face. "What's gotten into you?" the captain questioned in a chiding manner. "I want to make sure that Yuna is all right. Is there anything wrong with that?" Naruto asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Nothing, but you should know that only summoners, apprentice summoners and their guardians can enter here." Waka shook his head. "It's a tradition, very important." "Well, you know, last time I checked, everyone around here believes me to be a summoner," Naruto responded casually. "But apparently, you're not, yeah?" Waka asked before slapping his hand on his forehead. "Ah, Lu is going to be pissed." Naruto said nothing in reply, only shrugging his shoulders. "Well, now that we've come this far, might as well go all the way." It didn't take them long to get through the last trial and arrived at a large, circular room, being lit by many torches that adorned its rounded walls. The main feature of the room, however, was a tall sweeping staircase. It led up to an odd, almost oval-shaped door, which was spectacularly formed out of pure tan-colored stone. At either side, it was lit by beautiful roseate lamps, that highlighted every contour, every wonderful cleft in the door's structure. And standing waiting inside with, apparently more patience than him, was Lulu and Kamari. "What are you doing here?" she sneered coldly, raising herself from her seat upon the steps as she looked at Waka. "Didn't think we'd be able to handle it." "No, it's just," Waka stammered. Naruto popped out from behind the taller man and grinned brightly. "Yo," he greeted the busty woman cheerily, who widened her eyes at the sight of him. "You, what are you doing here?" Lulu asked in disbelief, her pale face dropped in mild shock. "You are not supposed to be here." Before Naruto could answer the question, a deep rumble ensued suddenly behind her, instantly drawing everyone's attention toward it. The door was opening. Waka and Lulu advanced to the staircase eagerly, leaving Naruto behind as he watched in anticipation. Slowly the door slid upwards, throwing blinding shafts of golden light into the dark room. But eventually, she lost her strength to keep herself on her feet and fell forward, making everyone gasp worriedly as she tottered on the edge, before plummeting down head first. Naruto dashed forward swiftly to save her, but Kamari had already done it, being the one standing closer to Yuna. With his help, the young woman stood up and steadied herself on her feet. Reaching her hands up, Yuna cast the brown hair back from her shoulders, shaking her head slowly to reveal her face, which was covered in sweats, much like the rest of her body. A look of enraptured joy passed over her serene face as she announced. "I have done it." She smiled. "I have become a summoner. Congratulations." Naruto gave her a thumb up and a 1,000-watt smile that could lit up the entire room. However, when all three guardians turned around to look at him like he had turned insane, the smile dimmed away before completely disappear. Congratulations." He congratulated her again, but with a smaller and softer tone. Yuna smiled and nodded her head. Line break. Soon, they were outside and the villagers all gasped in awe as the birth of a new summoner. When Yuna proceeded to leave the temple, they quickly walked with her outside in a hurry while cheering loudly in excitement. Following closely behind the group, Naruto looked ahead and noticed the people had now gathered together in a huge circle in the very middle of the village. He spotted Waka and quickly made his way through the crowd toward him. So, is she going to summon Aeon now? He asked and the captain of Besaid Aurochs nodded his head. You bet. Waka grinned before noticing Titus at the far side of the group. Raising his hand above his head, he called out to the fellow blitzball player, "Hey, over here." Wah! Ow! Hey! Titus yelled when Waka jumped at him and grappled him into another playful headlock from behind. What's going on? Who is she? He asked while looking at Yuna, totally confused. That's Yuna, the summoner. Titus gasped and had his eyes widened in shock. Summoner. I thought summoner was an old man. Not this one. Naruto shook his head. So what is she doing? Eagerly Waka dragged the Titus to the front of the crowd, making a path for Naruto to push through as well. Wait till you see this. He enthused excitedly. I can't see anything, Titus complained. Waka spun him round, releasing him roughly. Ready? He asked Yuna, who was standing a few meters away from them, her magic rod in hands. Okay. Yuna nodded her head before turning around. Standing in the middle of the circle, Yuna raised it and held her arms outstretched about her. Slowly, she brought the staff down, holding it tightly against her. Suddenly she took a step back and the ground beneath her erupted in an explosion of intense light, with orbs of light emerged from the ground and flew into the air, making Naruto look at her in amazement. The blonde continued to watch as Yuna stood still, with the light dancing around her feminine body. Soon enough, 4 large beams of light shot out from the ring of energy around her, heading to the sky while swirling around each other, causing the clouds to swirl around as well. Eventually, they met and exploded in a blinding explosion of light. In a flash, a creature burst through the clouds, soaring like a speeding bullet. Naruto stood with wide eyes as the great beast removed its wings from its body and hovered over Yuna, blowing her hair back with every strong swish of its wings. With a dull rumble, it landed on its feet just before her. Reaching her hand out, Yuna smiled as she gently caressed the red feathers that resided upon the creature's neck. The bird-like creature lowered its head down and nuzzled her hand willingly as her fingers passed through the shimmering feathers. The summoner removed her hand and turned back to the crowd as they showered her in a heavy rain of praises, all clapping and cheering excitedly. Beaming at her, Waka and Lulu came to congratulate her, proud of her great achievement. Valifor. Who's that? Naruto asked in surprise and snapped his head around to search for the source of that mysterious female voice. He could swear that he heard it in his head instead of his ears. Please, help us, help them. I must have become crazy. Naruto slapped his hands on his ears. The voice eventually stopped and didn't say anything more, but it creeped the hell out of him. Valifor. It couldn't possibly be the name of the Aeon, right? Also, who was talking to him? After Yuna's Aeon had disappeared in a flash of light and dispersed into multicolored orbs, pyre flies, night quickly fell upon Besaid village. As usual, a great fire blazed had been set in the middle of the village, in the spot where the now full-fledged summoner had summoned her first Aeon. The villagers were now gathered around it, all discussing and contemplating the great feat their new summoner had accomplished. Naruto, however, took no part in it, mainly because he didn't know if he could talk to any of them. Aside from congratulating Yuna for her accomplishment, the villagers were talking about many things he couldn't understand, or simply didn't know about. Being an outsider had its downside, after all. Aside from the villagers who had the same respect for him as they had for Yuna, the young woman and her orange-reddish-haired guardians were the only people Naruto usually talked to. However, at the moment, Yuna was being surrounded by the villagers, while Waka was talking to his team and being accompanied by Titus, yet another blonde-haired stranger who was washed ashore at Besaid Island's beach after he was attacked by Sin, and said to be affected by the creature's toxin, which was known to induce amnesia. To do our best. A loud cry from Besaid Aurochs caught his attention, and Naruto couldn't help but turn his head toward them. They were gathering around Titus, their fists clenching together with enthusiasm. Titus, meanwhile, was laughing quietly with a mild scoff while scratching the back of his head. No, we got a new goal now. Waka interrupted their chant with a firm tone, crossing his arms on his chest. Our new goal is victory. He took a step forward, raising his fist and stated loudly, with a voice full of determination, to win every match, to defeat every opposing team, to bring the Crystal Cup back to our island. That's all we have to do to win, easy, yeah. Victory. The team murmured, looking at each other momentarily. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at their doubt. He heard that the Besaid Aurochs was considered the worst team in Spira, as well as a horrendously ill-fated blitzball team. They had lost every single match they participated in for the past few years, which was probably the reason why they had so little faith in their chance of winning. Then, after a few seconds of silence, as if they had finally believed they could win the upcoming tournament, the Besaid Aurochs started chanting stimulatingly, "Victory!" Over and over, their voice full of determination this time. Naruto looked away and leant back against the wooden boxes behind him, supporting his head with both hands behind it. Hopefully, they did have the skills to pack it up. Taking a few moments to look around the village, Naruto could see that some of the villagers, most of them being children and their parents, had returned to their huts around the village. The party surely had come to an end. Somehow, his cerulean blue eyes found their way over the great crackling flames of the fire. Instantly his gaze singled out the young summoner, who was sitting away to the side, kneeling on the ground while speaking in length with two elderly people and a young child. Inquisitively, Naruto couldn't help but stare, watching as her skin shimmered illustriously in the orange glow of the fire. In the corner of her heterochromia eyes, she caught sight of him looking at her in the distance. She greeted him with a small smile over the top of her drinking cup, before raising one of her hand to wave at him, like Yuna usually did whenever their eyes met. "You don't mind if I join you?" Naruto turned his head to the side and saw Lulu slowly walking toward him with the usual calm expression on her face. "Yeah, sure, go ahead." Naruto shrugged and Lulu sat down, taking the empty spot to his left. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, by the way." "I know." She gave him a deadpanned expression, but turned away as soon as she saw the grin on his face. "You're messing with me, aren't you?" "Why should I? You don't seem like the type of person a guy like me wants to mess with," he questioned, removing one hand from the back of his head. "We have never had the chance to properly introduce ourselves to each other, haven't we?" he pointed out. His question came off more of a statement. Last time, he was on the verge of dying, and couldn't speak Spiran. It was Yuna who introduced him to her guardians. "I see, you're right." Lulu paused for a second before returning his introduction with her own. "I'm Lulu. It's a pleasure to meet you." Naruto smiled before he sat up and crossed his legs, putting his hands on his knees. "This has bothered me for a while now, so if you don't mind me asking, what are you, exactly?" he asked curiously. "I mean, when those plant fiends attacked the children, you fought them with fire magic, right? Other than Yuna, I haven't seen anyone around her perform feats like that, so are you a magic user or something?" "Yes, I am." Lulu nodded her head. "I am a black mage, a user of black magic." "Black magic?" Naruto crossed his arms on his chest, tilting his head to the side. "My magic inflicts direct damage to enemies. It focuses mostly on offensive spells that, when hit, hurt a lot." Naruto nodded his head in understanding. Though, from the sound of it, black magic probably had a few exceptions as well. Yuna, meanwhile, uses white magic, the opposite of black magic, its counterpart. She uses her magic to heal, defense and support others in battle. "Oh, I understand now, but what about her other magic, the one she used to summon her Eon?" "Only those who chose to become summoners can train in the process of summoning Eons. They're taught by the temples of the faith. It's the sacred art of Yevon." Lulu answered. "Acquiring an Eon from a faith is a fatiguing process, something not many can do, as summoners must have a strong mental bond with the faith to be able to call forth its Eon." "Sound complicated. I expect as much," the busty black mage muttered, but probably didn't know that Naruto could hear her very clear. "What about you? It's clear to me that Gamakichi-sama is not an Eon, so how did you summon him?" "Gamakichi-sama. Next time you meet him, don't call him like that, that guy has already had an ego bigger than himself." Naruto chuckled before answering her question. "It's a summoning technique that uses blood as sacrifice. You don't have to pray for them or anyone, you have to sign the Toad contract to have the permission to summon them." He paused for a second before continuing. remembering his past experience with Gamabunta, though, in some case, you also need to prove yourself to them. Gamakichi is okay, but his father isn't that friendly. Waka told me you're a shinobi, a mercenary who would do anything for a living. Naruto shrugged, must be very hard for you. I'm used to it. Naruto said, when you live most of your life alone, you have to learn how to fend for yourself. Most of your life alone. My parents died the day I was born. Oh, Lulu looked away. She should have seen that coming. He was an orphan, I'm sorry. Don't worry. Naruto shook his head, you're an orphan too, aren't you? Naruto asked before adding, I know one when I see one. I can also tell that Waka is an orphan. Yes, we are. Lulu nodded, our parents were killed by Sin. I'm sorry to hear that. Naruto sighed, my parents died protecting me in our village. My father was the leader of my village, while my mother was one of the best kunoichi, female shinobi. They're gone, but they left their legacy behind for me, hoping that one day I would become something great. Naruto closed his eyes, it was not something they wanted, leaving me behind shouldering the light all alone like that, but in the end, we're a family of shinobi of Konoha. Do you know that in my language, shinobi has the same character as endure? Naruto asked, making Lulu widen her eyes slightly in surprise, those who endure, it's the true meaning of being a shinobi. That is, deep. Lulu said in surprise, truly, I didn't expect anything like that from you. Yeah, I have come to understand it recently. Naruto chuckled. It was at that moment the Besaid Aurochs decided to throw another of their victory chant, this time, with Titus and Waka joining them. The team soon gathered in a circle and put their hands together in the middle, excited, aren't they? Let's just hope that they're going to do better this year. Lulu sighed before saying with a firm tone, what is Waka thinking anyway? Bringing that stranger to the village and bonding with him so quick like that. Was I not a stranger around here? Naruto asked simply, leaning back before putting both of his hands behind his head and putting his leg on another. Of course you were, Lulu said with a shake of her head before looking at Titus again, however, you were in great need of help, and Yuna had made up her mind to help you. Titus, on the other hand, is different. Everything he told us made no sense, since toxin or not. No matter how much he looks like Chappu, Waka shouldn't bring him here in the first place. Chappu. Who's that? The name caught his attention. He was Waka's brother. Lulu answered, almost instantly, he died fighting Sin. So you're saying that Waka probably sees him as a replacement for his brother. Lulu nodded her head. I was surprised the first time I saw him, but no matter what he looks like, he isn't Chappu. Cut him some slack, will ya? It's not like he is trying to become this Chappu person. Naruto pointed out, I think you should talk to Waka. It's not really healthy, seeing someone else as a replacement for your loved one. You don't have to tell me. I intend to. Then don't be too hard on him. It's also very painful to see someone who looks just like your late brother walking around like that. Lulu could only turn her head to look at Naruto for a moment before sighing longingly. You know, I think I should apologize for the way I acted around you. These past few days. To her surprise, Naruto only raised his hand and waved it around while grinning. Ah, don't worry about that. You have all the rights. I was a stranger that suddenly appeared. No, not like that, Lulu interrupted him while shaking her head. How should I put this? Sighing longingly, she then continued, Titus might look like Chappu, but it's you that reminds me of him. You two are very much alike. Oh, it didn't take him long to realize the hidden meaning in Lulu's words. It must be hard for her. Ahem, feeling the uncomfortable atmosphere between them, Naruto decided to change the topic. If you don't mind me asking, how do you become a summoner's guardian? Lulu, of course, was surprised by his question. Line break. Kuchio's no jutsu. Naruto slammed his hand down to the ground and cried the name of the summoning technique in his language, causing a huge toad to appear from a poof of smoke. He wasn't Gamakichi, and of course nowhere near as big as the future chief toad of Mount Myoboku, but still, he was nearly as big as a tent around the village. Whoa, what is that? Titus gasped in awe as he stood behind Naruto with Waka and Lulu, the people who had already seen Naruto performing the summoning feat the first time, but still they couldn't stop themselves from widening their eyes in amazement. Is that an Eon too? Is Naruto a summoner like Yuna? Titus asked in confusion while pointing his finger at the young man before him, as he walked toward the giant orange toad, who opened its mouth and stuck out its tongue, which carried a backpack and extended downward to give it to Naruto. "Ah, I nearly forgot that you have no idea," Waka stated while scratching the back of his head. "Speaking of which, there is something I want to give you right here." Waka reached behind his back as the blitzball player halted before them. Titus' eyes widened immensely in surprise as he beheld the object in the captain of Besaid Oroc's hand. "Whoa!" he exclaimed while letting his shoulders fall in awe. Within Waka's grasp was the most spectacular weapon Titus had ever laid eyes upon. It was a mighty-looking sword similar in style to the one the blonde used to have before he lost it after his second encounter with Sin, but this sword was 1,000 times cooler and looked 1,000 times stronger. The blade's surface shimmered in a magical cerulean sparkle that resembled a pool of glittering water to the naked eye. As Waka held it high above his head, the sunlight flickered dazzlingly upon its curved tip as Titus ran his eyes along the razor-sharp edge. It was truly an incredible weapon. "You're giving this to me?" the young man voiced astounded. "Yeah," Waka confirmed with a nod and a grin. "Use it well." Gratefully, Titus received the sturdy leather-bound hilt in his gloved palm. To his surprise, the weight of the weapon was far less superior than he'd expected. He smoothed his fingers slowly over the steel. There were the etchings of an embossed word scored his hand, which read, "Brotherhood." Slowly the blitzball player lifted the sword aloft before swinging it down. It rang majestically through the air, resounding like the chime of a single silver bell. "That's the sword you gave Chapu," the female guardian voiced sternly as she looked at Titus and Brotherhood, making the young man jerk his head around to Waka in alarm. "Well, he never used it," the orange-reddish-haired man reconfirmed while shaking his head. The woman didn't reply. "Hey guys, what's up?" They all turned their heads around and looked at Naruto as he called out and approached them. His summoning had disappeared, leaving behind a huge cloud of smoke and many stunned villagers. "Whoa, that's a badass sword you got there. Man," Naruto commented while looking at Brotherhood. "Yeah, thanks," Titus said sheepishly while scratching the back of his head. "Anyway, Naruto." Waka crossed his arms on his chest. "Lulu told me that you wanted to tag along with us. Are you sure about that, man? It's not going to be an easy journey, yeah." "Don't worry," Naruto shook his head as he looked at Lulu. "I know what I am doing. It's not like I can sit around here while you guys are putting your life in danger out there. Have to make myself useful to repay everyone's kindness, you know." Smiling, he then looked around for a moment before voicing his thought aloud. "Speaking of whom, where's Yuna?" The group glanced watchfully toward the temple in answer. "We're taking the same boat as Yuna, right?" Titus questioned as he slid the Brotherhood in the scabbard of his old sword on his back. It was a perfect fit. "Why do we gotta wait here?" the blitzball player continued, asking in confusion. Waka looked back to Titus. A somewhat solemn air of reminiscence resounded in his voice as he spoke. "Yuna came to this village 10 years ago when the last calm started," he said. Titus' brows furrowed. "The calm?" he inquired, puzzled. "Since then, she's been like a sister to me and Lulu," Waka continued, ignoring the Titus' bewildered question. "But she had the talent, she became an apprentice. Now, today, she leaves as a summoner. This is our journey. We should leave together," Lulu concluded. Her voice was deep, and the menacing glint in her ruby eyes warned Titus to beware, which caused him to gulp nervously. Just at that moment there was a ruckus up at the temple. The three of them turned to behold the newly born summoner laden with one of the most enormous suitcases they'd ever seen. She toiled with its cumbersome weight as she flipped it down the steps bluntly. "You really don't need all that luggage," Lulu called loudly, raising her dark eyebrows in wonder. "They're not really my things," Yuna answered softly, heaving the tan case up to its full height. Their gifts for the temples were to visit. "This isn't a vacation, Yuna," Waka chided lightly, placing his hands on his hips. "I guess," the summoner stared at the case with some distance. "I guess you're right," she agreed with a conclusive sigh. "Still, we can't just leave them behind after you have spent your time preparing them." Naruto spoke up as he approached Yuna, putting his backpack down to the ground. "Here, let me help you," he said and took a firm grip on the luggage. "Please, Naruto, you don't have to," but Yuna stopped, with her eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets when Naruto effortlessly lifted the luggage up and placed it on his shoulder. as if it was weightless. No way. She gasped, using a hand to cover her mouth in surprise. The more she knew about him, the more she was amazed by the feats he could do. Come on. Naruto turned his head and made a gesture for her to follow him. Man, where do that strength come from, ya? Waka asked as Naruto put the luggage down to the ground and kneeled down to open his backpack. The blitzball captain walked toward the luggage and tried to pick it up with both of his hands. He was able to do it, but not as easy as Naruto did. Put it down here, Waka. Naruto took out a small scroll from his backpack and put it down to the ground before unrolling it, revealing many black marking and strange symbols inside. Right here. He pointed to the middle of the page. What are you doing? Lulu asked when Waka put the luggage down. Deciding to not answer her question, Naruto turned back to the scroll and made a hand seal with his hands, before putting his hand down to the symbol at the right. In a poof of smoke, the luggage disappeared, leaving Yuna and her guardians completely stunned. There you go. Naruto grinned and rolled the scroll back and put it into his backpack. What was that, ya? What did you do? Waka asked in amazement with his mouth agape. Where did the luggage go? I sealed it into the scroll. Naruto answered as he pulled out a small pouch of shuriken and kunai osler. It's fuinjutsu, the sealing art. It's a type of ninja art that allows a shinobi to seal objects, living beings, along with a wide variety of other things within another object, which is usually scroll like this. He answered, picking out another scroll and showing it to them. Amazing. Yuna gasped in amazement while Naruto was wrapping the kunai osler around his right thigh before strapping the pouch to his behind. You're so amazing, Naruto. Thanks. Naruto blushed while scratching the back of his head. Anyway, if you have anything you cannot carry, give it to me, I will seal them into these scrolls. Seriously? Titus asked in surprise. Well, I will make sure to remember that then. Lulu crossed her arms over her chest and nodded her head. Anyway, Yuna. Naruto then turned his head back to Yuna. There's something I want to ask you. What is it? She asked warmly. Well, would you like to take me as your guardian? He asked, causing Yuna to gasp in surprise. Turning her head around, she looked at her other guardians, who didn't show the slightest of surprise at his request. They must had Naruto informed them about that beforehand. I mean, sure, I would love to, but I don't want to get you involved in Spira's affairs. Yuna stated softly before asking, plus, don't you want to return to your home, Naruto? Yeah, I really want to go home, you know. Naruto nodded his head while chuckling somewhat nervously, but, I can't just leave you guys here, facing sin like that, especially when I can lend you and everyone a hand. Naruto explained, I also owe you for saving my life, so I want to do something to repay your kindness. But you don't have to. Yes, I don't have to, I want to. Naruto shook his head with a smile before pointing at himself, wearing a confident grin on his face as he said, I'm a fighter, Yuna. I have been fighting all my life, so you will definitely find me useful for your pilgrimage. I don't know what to say, Yuna stated softly, putting her hand together in front of her thighs. Then don't. Naruto grinned, no matter what your decision is, I will just stick around and make sure you can go to temple unharmed. Your permission will only make it official. Last night, he had learnt from Lulu that you only needed the summoner's permission to become their guardians. The partnership between them didn't require any special rituals or anything magically weird like he had, though, it's not like I can find anything to do around here anyway. I have already sent a letter to my friends, telling them to halt whatever they are trying to do to bring me back. It's very nice of you to say that. Thank you, Naruto. Yuna bowed before looking at her guardians. What about everyone? I have no objection. Lulu shook her head, her expression remained unchanged. Me too. Waka smiled, the more the merrier, right? This isn't a game, Waka. Lulu instantly turned to him, and the muscular man could only scratch the back of his head in embarrassment. Then I accept you as my guardian, Naruto. Thank for listening. Do hope you enjoy. If you guys enjoyed, if you want a next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notifications, and also check out the other videos that have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.